There's a question women carry in their hearts but rarely say out loud. Why is it that some men feel peace in your presence, but leave anyway? Why do they seem to settle in your softness, confess their childhood wounds in your bed, whisper things they've never told anyone else, and then still vanish? How is it possible for a man to feel completely at home with you, but not stay? And deeper still, if he feels safe with me, why am I the one who ends up feeling abandoned? If you're listening to this, you've probably lived that question. You've loved deeply. You've been the one who listened when no one else did. You've been the arms he collapsed into when the world drained him. You saw his cracks, and you didn't flinch. You held space when he had no words, and you thought maybe, just maybe, that meant something lasting, but it didn't last. And now you're left staring into a silence that feels colder than betrayal, wondering what it was about you that made him open up, but not stay. Wondering if being a safe place for someone means anything at all. You aren't broken for asking that. You're not wrong for wanting someone to choose you back. And no, you're not too much for needing the kind of love that actually holds. Today, we're going to talk about this, not in the language of lectures or psychology, but through the ache and knowing in your own heart. This isn't about fixing yourself. This is about seeing yourself clearly, and seeing him too, maybe for the first time. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." But what if I told you some men aren't leaving because they don't love you? They leave because your presence reflects back everything they've been running from. And sometimes, they just aren't ready to stop running. Not even for peace. Not even for you. If any part of this speaks to the truth you've been carrying in silence, then stay. Breathe. This is not a story. It's a mirror. And by the end of it, something in you will shift. You might cry. You might release. But you will see yourself and him more clearly than ever before. If that's something your heart's been waiting for, make sure you follow this channel. Hit that like button so more people like you, people who feel deeply, can find this too. And if it speaks to something real, let us know in the comments. Let this be a place where the ones who feel deeply are finally seen. Some men don't feel at home in peace. That's the quiet truth nobody wants to say out loud. Because we've been taught that love heals, that love is enough. But what happens when your love creates a silence too honest for him to survive? He walks into your world like a man starved, not just for affection but for safety, for stillness, for someone who doesn't demand that he perform. And when he meets you, that's what he finds. You don't require him to be anything other than what he is. You listen without trying to fix. You see through his masks without trying to rip them off. You sit beside his storms and don't ask them to stop. And for the first time, maybe ever, he feels seen, not admired, not seduced, not worshipped. Seen. That's the moment most people confuse for love. But it's actually something more dangerous for him, because in that moment he feels what he never knew he was allowed to feel. Relief. The armor loosens. The noise fades. His body softens. He doesn't have to pretend. And for a brief, glowing second, he thinks maybe this is it. Maybe he's finally found someone who won't turn him into a project, someone who isn't scared of his wounds. But here's the part that breaks your heart. That feeling of safety. It's foreign to him. It doesn't feel like home. It feels like exposure, because for a man who was raised in emotional chaos, peace feels like danger. Softness feels like threat. And you, without even knowing it, become the mirror that reflects back everything he's buried. He sees the version of himself he could be. The father he never had. The pain he never dealt with. The love he never learned how to receive. And it overwhelms him, so he pulls back. Not because you're too intense. Not because you ask too much. But because something in him doesn't trust comfort. He wants the softness, but only in doses, only when it doesn't make him feel weak, only when he can still keep his guard up. He'll come close, then disappear. He'll text you deep things at midnight, then ghost you by morning. He'll tell you, "No one's ever made me feel like this," and then vanish without a word. It won't make sense. It will feel like you did something wrong. But hear me now. His leaving is not a measure of your worth. Some men do feel at home with you, and they leave not because they didn't feel it too, but because they did, and it terrified them. That's the paradox. You made him feel more than he was ready to feel. You reminded him of everything he buried. And that kind of mirror can't be looked at for too long. There's a moment you'll replay in your mind over and over. The way he looked at you, like he was remembering something he forgot he needed. Like your presence gave him access to a part of himself he lost long ago. You'll think surely this meant something. You'll look for clues in his touch, in the softness in his voice, in the pauses between his words. You'll question whether you imagined it. Because how could someone who felt that much just walk away? But he did feel it. That's the part that hurts the most. It was real. And it wasn't enough. Not because you weren't enough, but because he wasn't ready to live in that kind of truth. When a man is used to war inside his mind, in his home, in his childhood, peace feels unfamiliar. It's not what his nervous system knows. It doesn't match the survival patterns he built to make it through. You see, he didn't learn to breathe in softness. He learned to brace for impact. And you, in all your warmth and depth and emotional fluency, became something he couldn't categorize. You didn't trigger the usual chase. You didn't feed the drama he's used to mistaking for passion. You didn't play the game, and that unsettled him more than any argument ever could. You became a different kind of challenge. Not one he could conquer, but one that asked him to feel. And not just feel you, but feel himself. His mother never taught him how to sit in silence without shame. His father never showed him how to be soft without being weak. And so when he looked at you, when he felt the way his body relaxed near yours, when he heard himself open up and say things he'd never said before, something inside him panicked, because if he allowed himself to stay, he'd have to change. He'd have to strip away the armor. He'd have to stop hiding behind sarcasm and distraction and emotional distance. He'd have to confront the fact that you weren't confusing love with struggle, that you were offering him something different, love without survival, and he didn't know what to do with that, so he left. Or he stayed just enough to keep your light near, but not enough to truly receive it. You waited. You gave him grace. You told yourself maybe he just needs time. But deep down, you knew. You can't teach someone how to feel safe if their safety has always been chaos. You can't convince someone to stay where their healing begins if they're still loyal to their pain. And you can't make someone ready who is still addicted to the version of themselves that can't love fully. That's not your failure. That's his path. Here's the part no one tells you about being the one he felt safe with. It changes you. It makes you quieter. Not in the way that silence is your truth, but in the way pain silences a room after a scream. Because being someone's soft place and still not being chosen teaches you something raw. It teaches you that safety isn't always what people are looking for. That love can be real and still not be enough. That sometimes people aren't searching for home. They're searching for familiarity. And if what's familiar to them is chaos, if it's withholding, if it's push and pull, then they'll run from anything that asks them to rest, to receive, to be. You begin to question everything. Was I too understanding, too available, too calm, too loving? You spiral. You go back to texts, to nights where you stayed up with him on the phone, listening to his stories, hearing the tremble in his voice when he spoke about his father. You remember the way he traced your back with his fingers like he was searching for something ancient. You remember the breath he let out when he finally fell asleep in your arms. And you wonder, wasn't that real? Didn't it matter? Yes, it was real. It mattered. But not everyone who enters your heart is meant to stay. Some come to remember. Some come to feel. Some come because their soul recognized safety, but their wounds weren't ready for it. You were medicine, but medicine only works when someone's ready to heal. And he wasn't. Not yet. So now you're left with echoes, not just of him, but of yourself. Because in trying to understand him, you started to forget your own value. You began to measure your worth in his capacity to stay. But love doesn't work like that. Not real love. You don't earn someone's presence by softening your boundaries. You don't become more lovable by shrinking your needs. You don't become the one by proving you're easy to love. Because you already are. You always were. His absence doesn't make you less safe. It makes him less able to receive what's sacred. And sacred things are not meant to be chased. They're meant to be met. You didn't lose him. He lost the version of himself he could have become beside you. And that is a heartbreak he may never fully understand. There's something powerful about a woman who finally stops asking, why wasn't I enough for him? And starts wondering, why did I need him to see my worth in the first place? Because underneath every heartbreak like this, there's a deeper question you may have never dared to ask. The one that sounds like, why do I keep attracting men who feel safe with me, but don't stay? The answer isn't in how you love. It's in how deeply you've been trained to prove your love. You were probably the child who learned to be emotionally fluent before you could name your own needs. The one who read the room before anyone said a word. The one who learned that being quiet, kind, nurturing, available, intuitive was how you stayed safe. The one who kept peace by anticipating what everyone else needed, even if it meant silencing what you needed. So when a man walks in with sadness in his eyes and rage in his chest, you recognize him, not as danger, but as familiar. You don't run from his complexity. You lean in. You soothe. You understand. And the part of you that learned to find worth in being needed feels important again. You don't call it self-abandonment. You call it love. You call it empathy. You call it connection. But love is not healing if it costs you yourself. Empathy is not real if it only flows one way. And connection built on pain recognition, not mutual readiness, will always collapse. You keep wondering why men come to you when they're wounded. It's because they know you'll hold them without flinching. They can feel that you've been hurt before, that you've survived things you never speak of, that your comfort isn't a performance, it's lived. But here's the truth no one wants to say. Men who haven't faced their own wounds will always be drawn to women who have, because your depth is intoxicating. but they'll resent you for it once it demands anything of them. When you mirror back their pain, they'll call you intense. When you ask for emotional responsibility, they'll call you too much. When you stop performing softness without reciprocity, they'll say you've changed. You haven't changed. You've just stopped tolerating the version of love that asks you to disappear. You deserve a man who doesn't just feel safe with you, but offers safety in return. Who doesn't just rest in your peace, but protects it. Who doesn't just feel at home in your arms, but builds a home in his life that includes you without resistance. And until then, you do not have to keep giving the softest parts of you to men who are only searching for a place to hide from themselves. There's a kind of quiet grief that comes from being the one who helped him feel again, only for him to walk away as if none of it mattered. You sit with that ache in the dark. You question your worth. You replay every conversation, every moment he leaned into you like a man discovering oxygen. And you wonder if maybe you imagined the depth. Maybe it wasn't what you thought it was, but deep in your body, you know it was real. You felt it in the way he exhaled when he held you, in the way his voice softened when he spoke your name, in the stillness that came over him in your presence. Like something in him stopped fighting just for a while, and yet it wasn't enough. Not because you weren't enough, but because his love had conditions his wounds created. Conditions like, don't get too close. Don't ask for more than I'm ready to give. Don't expect me to be who you see in me. He saw himself through your eyes, and it was both beautiful and unbearable, because no one had ever seen him with that much clarity. No one had held his contradictions with that much grace. No one had touched the broken boy beneath the man without demanding he toughen up. And that terrified him, because healing requires accountability. It asks that we feel the pain we've numbed, confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather bury. You didn't just represent love, you represented transformation. And not everyone is ready for that. It's easier to return to what's predictable, to people who don't ask too many questions, to relationships that don't threaten the identity they've built around avoidance, to women who need less, demand less, feel less. So he left. Or he stayed in a way that felt hollow. He lingered in the background, maybe even kept the door cracked open just enough to keep your energy near, but not enough to commit. And you felt that imbalance in your bones. You started shrinking, not all at once, but slowly. You stopped asking for what you needed. You smiled through the disappointment. You waited for the version of him he showed you in the beginning to come back, but that version of him wasn't sustainable, because it was born in your light, not his own. He borrowed your strength to feel whole. He rested in your empathy because it allowed him to temporarily escape himself. And when it came time to build something, he couldn't. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to love without running from his reflection. And the deeper your love became, the more clearly he saw himself. Not the man he pretended to be, but the one still hiding inside. The one who never learned how to stay. Now you're left holding memories that don't know where to go. A touch that meant more to you than it did to him, or so it seems. You tell yourself stories to make sense of the emptiness he left behind. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I should have been more patient. Maybe he just wasn't ready. Maybe one day he will be. But what if you stop waiting for one day? What if you stop trying to make sense of someone who never gave you clarity to begin with? What if you finally stop letting the heartbreak of his leaving convince you that your softness was the mistake? Because here's the truth that may take years to fully settle into your bones. He didn't leave because you loved him too deeply. He left because he wasn't ready to be loved without a mask. Most people love through filters. You didn't. You loved him through truth. You loved the wounded parts he kept hidden. You loved the silences between his words, the fears behind his strength. You saw the boy inside the man, and you didn't flinch. That's the kind of love most people think they want, until they realize it demands honesty, and responsibility, and growth. You were the earthquake, not because you caused chaos, but because you revealed the cracks in his foundation. He couldn't pretend with you. He couldn't distract himself. And so he left, because staying would have meant crumbling the version of himself he built just to survive. So you're not crazy for wondering why a man who said he felt safe with you could still disappear. You're not broken for still missing someone who never learned how to stay. You're just human. You loved someone who didn't know what to do with real love. And now you get to choose something else. You get to stop performing for people who only know how to take. You get to stop offering sanctuary to men who are still addicted to the battlefield. You get to protect your own peace, not just offer it. You get to wait for the man who doesn't come to you for escape, but to build something with you. The kind of man who feels at home in your presence, and instead of leaving, adds to it. Who doesn't just say, "I've never felt this way before," but shows you. In the consistency of his presence, in the steadiness of his effort, you get to be loved by someone who is not overwhelmed by your depth, who doesn't shrink in your light, who doesn't find your softness suffocating, because he'll have met himself before he met you. He'll have already done the work, and he'll recognize you not as a mirror, not as a mother, not as a moment of comfort, but as a partner, as his equal. So now you're standing at the edge of your own healing, not waiting, not hoping he'll come back with better intentions, but facing the truth with eyes wide open. You were never meant to be his rescue. You were not placed in his life to fix him, to wait for him, to prove your love through pain. You were there to show him what was possible, and he showed you what you will never accept again. That's the gift hidden inside the ache. It teaches you the difference between being chosen and being convenient, between being needed and being respected, between being a sanctuary and being an emotional crutch. Because now you know what it feels like to be used as a mirror. Now you know how to spot a man who's drawn to your softness but intimidated by your strength. Now you know that love isn't just chemistry or closeness or confession. Love is capacity, and he didn't have it. Not because he's a bad man, but because he hadn't become the man his heart needed him to be. And that's not something your love could do for him. You gave him what he wasn't ready to hold, and for that, he left. But don't let his leaving make you forget the beauty of what you offered. The courage it took to open your heart in a world that tells women to be cool, detached, indifferent. You weren't any of those things. You were present. You were real. You were there. And someday, someone will meet you there. Not halfway, not inconsistently, but fully, with both feet on the ground, with a heart that doesn't panic at the sight of yours. He will feel at home with you, not because you make him forget his pain, but because he's already faced it. He will feel at home with you because he is at home in himself. That's when love becomes something else entirely. Not a healing project, not a roller coaster, not a puzzle to solve, but peace, a shared peace, not something you have to hold alone. So no, you're not crazy for how deeply you feel. You're not weak for how much you gave. You're not too much. You're not too soft. You're not hard to love. You just loved someone who wasn't ready to receive it. And now, you're free. Free to stop chasing closure from someone who couldn't even offer clarity. Free to stop giving your all to people who only show up in fragments. Free to be fully met, deeply cherished, wholly seen. Thank you for spending these moments here. If this touched something inside you, share it. Let someone else feel a little less alone. Subscribe if you want more truth like this. And leave a comment to tell us the moment that resonated most with you. Your voice matters here, and your heart, it's safe here.